Thank you for attending this training video. My name's Anne from Orchid Systems, and today I'm going to run through Document Management Link. But first of all, is this product for you? Do your employees need to file, locate, and refer to various documents when processing transactions in Sage 300 or answering customer queries? Examples of these documents are purchase orders, invoices, contracts, etc. Or are your aspirations to support staff mobility, remote working, or multiple office locations being held back by a reliance on physical documents? Does the prospect of a paperless office with seamless integration between Sage 300 and your document management or file sharing system sound appealing? Your file sharing system could be SharePoint, OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive, or your normal network folder. If any of these sound appealing to you, then Document Management Link might be a product worth considering. Document Management Link provides context-sensitive documents linked on any Sage 300 SDK screen and associated data. This applies to all the core Sage 300 modules, for example, Common Services, Admin Services, GL, AR, AP, OE, IC, PO, Project and Job Costing, Canadian payroll, or US payroll. It also applies to any third party developing screens through the SDK, for example, all of Orchid's modules like EFT, RMA, inter-entity transactions, etc. You can attach or link documents to master files like customers, vendors, items, GL accounts, sales reps, locations, categories, etc. And you can also link documents to any combination of two master files. For example, if you had specific label requirements for a particular customer and a particular item, you could associate the label requirements document to that particular combination. Similarly, for a vendor and item. You can also link documents to transactions, for example, GL journals, orders, shipments, invoices, receipts. And you can also link documents to a master file and transaction, for example, a specific vendor and a specific invoice, or a customer and a receipt. In this training session, we're going to go through how to activate the module using Administrative Services Activate. Then we're going to go through the Information Manager licensing for Document Management Link that you can use in the IM setup area options. You can use the Notes and DML hotkey tab, and you can also use the Notes user options in IM transactions. And we're going to configure Document Management Link. And to do this, we're going to use the visual process flow for Document Management Link setup. And this has links to the IM options, Notes and DML hotkey. We're going to run through how and when to refresh the tray icon, how to start the tray icon, and we're going to go through Notes user options if you want specific documents to be shown for specific users only. After downloading and installing Information Manager, you would need to activate Information Manager in the appropriate companies. And based on your serial number and activation code, in the Information Manager license option, you would see what you are licensed to run. In this case, I have a Document Management Link license with 10 Orchid users. The Document Management Link module comes with one Orchid user included, and you can purchase additional Orchid users. This number here shows you the total number of Orchid users for this particular site. Orchid users enables the email SmartLink, so you are able to email a SmartLink to colleagues, which will, when clicked on, will hyperlink back to the appropriate screen. And Orchid users are able to view linked documents. This box here always shows you the currently active Orchid users, and it is a concurrent user basis. In order to use the document management link setup visual process flow, we would first go to admin services and assign the visual process flow to those users who need it. So I'm logged in as admin, and I'm going to enable the document management link visual process flow for the admin user. With a document management link license, I have access to the information manager setup, to the options, to the DML and hotkey tab and the SharePoint tab, and in IAM transactions, I have access to the notes user options. And I have access to the tray icon, but I can use the information manager document management link visual process flow to help me with the setup. If you're using SharePoint, you do the necessary configuration in SharePoint and then link the SharePoint site to your document management link. On the Notes DML hotkey setup, you would configure your individual screens as to which documents to show around which screens. And you would also need to start the tray icon for individual users or for all users. Any changes to the configuration, you would refresh your tray icon and then go ahead and run the appropriate screens and attach the documents. The first configuration we're going to do is for the tray icon. Initially, we're going to set the tray icon to start for all DML users, and then we're going to view how we can provide user-specific options, both in the tray icon for individual ORCID users and or in the IAM transactions notes user options for individual user options. Initially in the IAM options, on the Notes and DML hotkey tab, you can set the tray icon to start automatically. This is recommended if the majority of your users will be ORCID users. Having set that to start, when anyone connects to a Sage 300 company where this is configured, then the tray icon will start automatically for them. Initially, the tray icon is in the system tray, but you can drag it into the visible system tray so you can always keep an eye whether it's running or not. The second setting you have is to control user by user. By going to the tray icon and selecting options, you can set user by user whether this particular user is an ORCID user or not. If they are not an ORCID user, they can still access notes if you have a notes license, but they will only see document management link if their associated ORCID user has been selected. The third option you have is in the IAM transactions notes user options, where user by user you can say whether or not to automatically start the tray icon, take the default setting from IAM options, or always start for this user, or don't start for this user. And whenever you have the tray icon running for any users, you should deselect this workstation users IAPs in the Help Current Users. The first documents we're going to configure are Masterfile documents, and we're going to attach Masterfile documents to vendors. We're going to display the list of documents in the alert box, and we're going to store the documents on a network folder. We're going to show these documents in AP Vendor Activity, and on the purchase order entry screen. When configuring documents around a screen, we need to know what the screen ID is and what the field label is, and we can use the tray icon to help us in this task. So by clicking right-hand mouse button and clicking on the options and dragging the Information Manager hotkey tray icon beside the screen that you want to configure around, you can see when I click in my AP vendor screen, it is showing me that the roto ID is AP 1200 and the field label is vendor number asterisk. When I click in the AP vendor activity screen, it is showing me that the screen ID is AP 1500 and the field label is vendor no full stop. And when I click on my purchase order entry screen, it is showing me that the roto ID is PO 1210. And if I have a new PO where the vendor number is not grayed out, it is showing me that the field name is vendor number asterisk. It is in the IM Options, Notes and DML hotkey tab that we set up the individual configuration rows, and it is easier to work on the detail zoom. For type, if you're using Document Management Link, you would select either SharePoint or Network folder. For our vendor documents, we're going to be storing them in a network folder, so that's what we'll select. If you are wanting to display free format notes, as long as you want can contain hyperlinks and pictures, you would select notes, and that's our product notes. If you're wanting to show structured data, you can use our product optional tables and select info set. And if you are using notes in conjunction with Extender, you can display Extender scripts to get conditional notes. But for Document Management Link, you are selecting either Network folder or SharePoint. The Roto ID is the screen ID against which you want to display your documents. If we go back to our tray icon and the AP vendor screen, we see the Roto ID is AP1200 and the field name is vendor number asterisk. So we would fill in here AP1200 and vendor number. The label is always entered in uppercase, but must match the field label on the screen with respect to spaces and punctuation exactly. The case is not relevant. We note in the field name is vendor number asterisk. Asterisk is the Sage 300 standard way of showing the field name is mandatory. If we do configure against vendor number asterisk, then we would need two configuration rows, one when the field has not yet been entered, vendor number asterisk, and one when the field has been entered, vendor number. Or if you leave the asterisks off and never use asterisks in any of your configuration rows, then your configuration row would apply to both vendor number asterisks and vendor number without the asterisks. We recommend just configuring to vendor number, no asterisks. We would use second field label if we were configuring to two fields at the same time, but in our case, we're just configuring to the vendor number. And here we put in the value of the folder that we want to store the documents in. In our configuration, we want to store the documents on the C drive, documents, SAM Inc. So we're going to have a folder per company, then AP documents. So I can just copy this particular network path into here. And I'm going to leave curly brackets value, curly brackets, because what that will do is create a folder for me on the fly for each of our values, which would be, in our case, our vendor numbers. So I would end up with a folder for 1200, 1400, 1450, etc. for all our vendor numbers. I don't need to create those folders in advance. Document Management Link will create them as they need them. And when displaying the documents in this particular folder, we can elect whether we want to show folders and files or just files only. So for example, if you were going to have a folder for last year's documents and another folder for the previous year's documents, and you just wanted those one click away, you might say folders and files. But if you only ever wanted to show the files that were in this, we would select files. We're going to leave this one as folders and files. We can, if we want, rename the document as we're copying it in or adding it to the folder. In this case, we're going to leave the document based on its original name. And we're going to show the presence of documents in the alert box. We're not going to show the presence of documents by making this tray icon blink or go red. We want to see the list of documents in the alert box, and the heading for the documents is going to be our vendor documentation. So when we go ahead and save this, before this will become active, we need to refresh our tray icon. To refresh the tray icon, you can right-hand mouse button and click refresh. And to test if we have documents now for our AP vendors, we can see that automatically The document management link list is shown in the alert box, and it's called vendor documentation, albeit we don't have any documents yet. We can add a new document by clicking Add or Explore and adding a document, or we can drag and drop a document into this folder. So using Windows Explorer, if I find a document, and if this was my purchase order that I wanted to drag into this documentation, I could just drag and drop here, or I could have clicked Add and browse to this directory and save the document. Because I just clicked the document and dragged it in, the document has just been copied. But if I wanted it to be moved there, I would have hit Control and clicked the document and moved it across. If you copy the same document a second time, for example, you might have 2 scanned pages of a purchase order, you could say copy it and rename the second file with the date and time, or -1, -2, -3, etc. Or you could type in a completely new document. But in my case, I'm just going to overwrite the existing file. Based on this document being dragged and dropped into this folder, Document Management Link has now created a folder 1200 under the AP documents and placed that document in there. Using the alert box to display your documents, you can either pin the alert box to the source screen so that when you move the screen around or minimize and maximize the screen, the alert box minimizes and maximizes with it. Or if you have 2 screens and want to display the document list on a second screen, you can unpin it and put this box, the alert box, on your second screen. In order to display these same documents on the AP vendor activity screen, we can use the Information Manager tray icon to tell us that we need to configure for the screen AP 1500 and the field label is vendor no full stop. And the existing configuration row in IAM options on the Notes and DML hotkey tab needs to be duplicated for this new roto ID and field label. After saving the IAM options, we can refresh the tray icon, and we notice that the tray icon goes grey, indicating it is no longer active until we open a screen which is now configured again. And to test, we see the yellow DML and notes icon indicating that this screen has documents configured for it, and when we select vendor 1200, we see the document that we dragged in previously. The other screen we want to see the documents against is the PO purchase order entry. Using the tray icon, we see that the roto ID is PO1210 and the field name is vendor number. In IAM options on the Notes and DML hotkey tab, we can either do an additional configuration row for the PO120, or if we want, we can remove the roto ID from this particular setup, and then documents will be shown against any screen which has the field label vendor number. Refresh the tray icon and test in PO order entry. We will also see the same documents in PO receipt entry, as the field label is also vendor number. But we will also see it on any screen which has vendor number as the field label, as you can see even from Finders. So if you want it on all screens, including Finders, we can just leave it as vendor number. If we only wanted it on the PO receipt entry, the PO order entry, and the PO invoice entry, we should go and have one configuration row for each screen, including the correct roto ID. We have seen Masterfile documents, vendor documents, and we've seen them being displayed in the alert box, stored on a network folder, and we've seen them against AP vendors, AP vendor activity, and PO order entry. Now we're going to set up documents which will be visible with a combination of Masterfile and transaction details. We're going to show vendor and invoice documents. We're going to display it in an alert box, and we're going to show it on AP invoice entry and AP vendor activity. The first screen we want to show the AP vendor invoices against is the AP invoice entry. And we see that the roto ID is AP2100 and the field name for the document number is document number and the field name for the vendor number is vendor number. We note also that we're already seeing the vendor documentation that we configured earlier against the field label vendor number. The second screen we want to see the vendor invoices is the AP vendor activity, and using the Information Manager tray icon, we see the roto ID is AP 1500 and the field name is vendor no full stop. And the invoice number field label is also document number. And for our vendor invoices, we want to have two lists of documents. The first list must be the individual invoice that we've currently highlighted, in this case 100-01. And the second list will be a list of all the invoices for this vendor. And we want these two to appear before the vendor documentation that we see now. And we want the AP invoices to be stored in the C Documents SAMINC AP Invoices folder, and within there, within a folder for each vendor. In IM Options, on the Notes DML hotkey tab, we are going to first change the original configuration row for vendor number so that the display order is 3. That is, this list of documents will display third in the alert box. Then we're going to insert two new configuration rows for AP2100. This one is to display the vendor, all the vendor invoices, and that will display as the second list, and this one will display the individual invoice. Looking at all the vendor invoices, we see that we've changed it to network folder, display on the AP2100 screen, field label is vendor number. This is the path that we want to display. We want to display documents from this path here, and when you click in that box, it gives you some help text as to what you can use in that text box. We want to display files and folders, and the notification method, this tray icon, we're going to leave it none. We're going to show the documents in the alert box, and we're going to label that box all invoices. And the last configuration row, again, is network folder for AP2100. This time the display order is 1, so this will be the first list of documents that we see. And it's configured to two fields this time. The first one, vendor number, and the second one, document number. And in the path for the documents, we want to use the C Documents SAMINC AP Invoices, and then we want to replace value with the vendor number. And within that directory, we want to filter and show only those documents which contain value 2, which is the document number. Actually not contain, but that start with the document number. And we're going to display files only. And this time we're going to use the rename file to box. So when we drag and drop or add a document into this alert box document list, we're going to rename the file to the value 2 and the original extension of the file. So it's going to rename the file to the document number. The notification method is none. We're going to show the alert and label this particular box individual invoice. Save the options and refresh the tray icon. To test these two new configuration rows, we go to AP Transactions, Invoice Batch, and we can now see around the AP invoice entry, we have the first box is for the individual invoice, 1200/INV123, and that is taking the vendor number and invoice number value and value 2 from the screen. The second box is all the invoices for vendor 1200, and the third box is the original configuration row we had for the vendor documentation. And to drag a new document in, If I go to a folder where I have some previously available documents, I could drag this document in, drop it in the first box, and you notice it has relabeled it based on the value of the document number field, keeping the original file extension as we had set up in our configuration row. Because I just clicked and dragged and dropped, the document has been copied into that folder. But if I had wanted to, I could have held down the control button and dragged the document in to move it. I could also have clicked on Add and browsed to find the folders and chosen a file that way too. When we dragged in this document, what Information Manager Document Management Link did was to create the folder for us for Vendor 1200 in our configured documents directory. So there's our directory for SAMINC and AP invoices, and it has created 1200 and put that PDF and renamed it to the INV123 field. If we were to drag again, for example, say that invoice was 2 pages and it was 2 separate PDFs, we could drag that file again. And this time it'll prompt us, do we want to overwrite the existing file, call it INV123 and the date, call it INV123 and the next number up, which is -1, or do we want to name the file ourselves? For example, we could say INV123 page 2. Selecting a new vendor and dragging in a document for this particular invoice. We can see that invoice gets copied across as well. And moving back to vendor 1200, we see the documents that we had dragged previously. So this specific document is a filter on the same folder and just showing us those documents which start with the document number INV123. And we wanted to see the vendor invoices on the vendor activity too. So the first thing we do is just change the display order for our original vendor documentation files, and then add 2 more configuration rows for the vendor number and document number combined, and another row just for the vendor number. So this one will show, the vendor number one will show invoices only, the vendor number and document number one will show the specific invoice. And we want that to show first. So its display order is 1. We're showing the contents of a network folder. The rotor ID is AP1500. For vendor, no full stop as the field label, and the second field label is document number. And we have the same path and filter on the document number. We're showing files only, showing it in the alert, and the alert box is labeled individual invoice. The second document management link box will be triggered by the vendor NO field label, showing the same directory without any filter. This time it's showing files and folders, and it's labeled vendor invoices. And the third document management link box was our original one for the AP1500 vendor no, and showing our vendor documentation. After doing the configuration rows, we would save and refresh the tray icon and test in our vendor activity. So we can see with no vendor number, we see all the vendor folders that have been created as we dragged and dropped documents in. For vendor 1200, we see the single invoice with page 1 and page 2 that we dragged in on the vendor invoice entry. But for 1350, we see a number of invoices associated with 1350 and some vendor documentation that we had dragged in earlier. But when we're on the transactions page, and now we have both vendor number and document number on the screen, we get our third box, which we've chosen to have first. We don't have the credit note yet, our PDF'd, but if we click on the other documents, we will see those documents being individually highlighted in the top and also shown in the vendor invoices box. So we see IN 135092 both in the individual invoice box at the top and in the list of documents down below. So we've seen the configuration necessary to show a combination of Masterfile and transaction documents. So in our case, vendor and invoice number documents. And we've seen them in the alert box stored on a network folder. We saw it against AP invoice entry and against AP vendor activity. The next configuration we're going to do is Masterfile documents only. We're going to configure around the customer for their contracts. And we're going to display the list of documents in the alert box, but we're going to store the documents in SharePoint. And we're going to display these documents against AR customers, the AR customer inquiry, and the order entry screen. You first need to go to your SharePoint and configure the metadata tags against which you want to store the relevant Sage 300 information, so you can filter to find those documents. So in my SharePoint, I want to store my Sage documents on the Sage 300 DML site, and I want to put vendor documents in an individual folder for each vendor. But for customer documents, I want to put them in a folder or a library called customer documents, and then within there I'm going to have a library or folder for each of my individual customers and then the documents within that. Document Management Link is able to update 5 metadata tags on any one document. It can update the field label, the DML field label, for example, customer number label, and the DML field value, for example, customer number 1200. And if you're linking to a document from 2 fields on the screen, you can use the DML field label 2 and DML field value 2. So if we were thinking about the vendor and invoice example that we've just done on the network folder, this would say vendor number, that would be 1200, this would be document number, and that would be INV 123. But we're going to work with customers, and we're only going to configure to the field label being customer number and the field value being 1200 or whatever the customer number is. And when you mouse over your site in Document Management Link, at the bottom you can see you've got your SharePoint connection details and the site details and then the library within that site. And that's the information that we need for our SharePoint configuration. Initially in the IAM options, on the SharePoint tag, you would fill in the server. In my case, I'm using Office 365, and that is my server URL. I fill in the site that I want to update, and I select that I'm using SharePoint.com. We also support SharePoint 2010, 2013, and 2016. And then on the configuration rows, we would add a configuration row per field label or combination of field labels that we need for linking to the SharePoint documents. As with network folder, we first need to know what the field label is and what the roto ID is. So looking at our customers and using our tray icon, we can see the roto ID is AR1300 and the field label is customer number. So back in our IAM options, we would add a configuration row for AR1300, and this time it's using SharePoint. When we select SharePoint, we notice we get different fields to fill in. We first need to configure to the value, so which field label are we working with or value are we working with on the screen, and it's going to be customer number. And then we need to say the 2 metadata tags that we're using in SharePoint to link to the customer number. So this is the field label, which is actually going to say the words customer number, and this is the field value, which will have 1200 for customer 1200. We're not linking to 2 fields at once, so we're just going to leave these blank. The next thing you fill in, like your network folder, but this time you fill in your folder within your site. And in our case, it's Sage 300 DML, customer documents, and then in curly brackets, value. So it will be a folder per customer number. And SharePoint and DML will create those on the fly if we need them. And the second thing you can do is apply a filter to the folder, just like we could on the network folder, we filtered for document number star dot star to show us all the documents starting with the document number on the screen. But this time, you're not just filtering on the file name, you can filter on your metadata tags. So we're saying we want to filter on the field label equal customer number, which is going to come from this value here, and the DML field value equals the customer number. So SharePoint is case sensitive, so you need to be careful with your field labels, what you've created them as, and replicating the same case in Sage 300 setup. And then if you want, you can optionally open the SharePoint screen when you upload the document, and that enables you to add other metadata tags like the title or any other information you might want to store with the document. And you can optionally fill in the Sage Roto ID, so which screen were you on when you uploaded this document. And we're going to show the notification method as with our network folder. We're leaving that as none. We're showing the documents in the alert box, and the heading is going to be customer contracts as stored in SharePoint. We would save this and refresh our tray icon, and then go to our AR customers screen to test. So we're seeing that we've got a configuration, but no documents yet. But if we open up our alert box showing our SharePoint documents in this case, we can see our label, customer contracts, SharePoint, and their customer number. And just like we can with the network folder, we can now drag and drop documents in here. So I could drag in my contract for Bargain Mart. And when I load it into SharePoint, because I had configured SharePoint to automatically open the upload screen as I loaded in, this screen is being uploaded, and you can see the file name is passed across, but so is the DML field label as customer number, the DML field value as 1100. These are blank because I wasn't using two field labels, but the Roto ID is filled in as well. But here I can put in my any comment or any title for this particular document. So in this case, this is going to be the contract. And I would click Save. So just minimizing our SharePoint. And I closed our document list box. So let's just get these to refresh through. So no documents yet for our customer 1105. But you can see here is the document that we've just uploaded, and not only do we have the file name, but we've also got the title of the file. So sometimes file names are shortened and not that meaningful, but you can start working and searching on the title if that's what you need to do. And viewing where that document was uploaded to SharePoint, if I go to my library, Sage 300 DML, into my customer documents, into my folder 1100, you can see this document uploaded here. And the DML field label was set to customer number. The DML field value was set to 1100. The DML Sage Roto ID was set to AR 1300. And the title was as we typed it in. And in order to show those same documents stored against the customer in SharePoint against the AR customer inquiry, we would need to do a configuration for AR 1700 against the field label customer NO full stop. And to see those same documents in OE order entry against the customer, we would also need to configure against the field label customer no full stop on the OE 1100. We can then do two additional configurations, the same as this one for the AR customer, and use the same values for the AR customer activity and for the order entry screen. Save and close the configuration rows, refresh the tray icon, and test back in AR customers customer inquiry. We see the SharePoint documents, and in order entry on the OE order entry screen, we see the SharePoint documents. We have seen the configuration of Masterfile documents stored in SharePoint, and we saw this against the customer storing the customer contracts, and we saw those documents on AR customers, AR customer inquiry, and OE order entry. And the final configuration we're going to do for transaction documents is for the OE order entry screen. We're going to display the documents in the alert box, and we're going to have a separate network folder and configuration for each of the document types. We're going to show the invoice in the first box. We're going to show the delivery documents in the second box, and we're going to show the customer purchase order for the specific sales order in the third box. Using the tray icon beside the OE order entry screen, we see the order entry screen is OE1100, and the order number field that we want to configure the delivery documents against is the order NO full stop. The PO number field is PO NO full stop, and the last invoice number or invoice number field is last invoice NO full stop. Using the IM options on the Notes and DML hotkey tab, initially we're going to change the display order for our existing row for the SharePoint customer contracts to 4, because we want to display that in the last list of documents. And then we're going to configure 3 new rows for our purchase order number, our invoice number, and our delivery documents. The first document we want to show is the customer invoice. We're going to store the invoice in the AR documents folder in a directory for the customer, and we're going to filter this directory for those invoices or those documents starting with the invoice number. The second document list we're going to have is the list of delivery documents for the order, and we're going to store those in a folder called OE documents, and there's going to be a folder per order number. The third list of documents we're going to have is the individual purchase order number for the customer, and they're going to be stored in the folder AR documents, an individual folder per customer, and we're going to filter for those documents starting with the purchase order number or value 2. And the fourth list of documents is the original configuration row we did for the customer contracts in SharePoint. After adding these configuration rows, we would save and refresh our tray icon and test. On the order entry screen for customer 1100, we see the SharePoint contract, and if we have the documents, we can drag them into the appropriate boxes. So this is the purchase order, the invoice, and the delivery dockets. The customer and invoice number giving us the directory and filter for the invoice, the order number giving us the directory for the delivery documents, the customer and purchase order number giving us the directory for the purchase order number and the filter, and the customer number giving us the SharePoint contracts. We have now seen transaction documents showing around the OE order entry screen, invoices in the first box, delivery documents in the second box, customer purchase order number in the third box, and the original SharePoint contracts in the fourth box. Now we're going to have a look at Email SmartLink, the functionality it provides, how it is configured, and what recipients of the Email SmartLink can do. We're going to have a look at the AR customer activity and send a link to AR customer activity, and we're also going to send a link to a GL journal batch. For the logged on user, if they have been configured as an ORCID user, they are able to view documents, but they also get the Email SmartLink, which is the screen envelope on all screens. Clicking on the Email SmartLink launches your email client, and you can paste into the email message a link back to this particular screen with this particular data. And closing down the screen, so I can show you the effect of clicking on the hot link, If I was to receive this email, if I mouse over this hot link, you can see it's going to launch the Orchid web service. It's going to open the company SAMINC, open the screen AR1700, and the customer number is going to be 1100. So if I open this hyperlink, if I wasn't already logged on to Sage 300, it would ask me which company I wanted to connect to and log me in, and then open the AR customer inquiry with 1100 as the customer number, and any notes or documents that have been configured around that screen will open up. And just like we can use the email SmartLink on a customer inquiry screen or a Masterfile screen, we can use it on a journal screen or a transaction screen too. Clicking on the email SmartLink, we can paste a link back to that journal batch and entry number, closing the screen in the background, and opening the hyperlink by opening or double-clicking. The associated company will be opened with the associated transaction. We have seen if you're configured as an Orchid user, you can use the email SmartLink either on a Masterfile screen, an inquiry screen, or a journal entry screen, or any transaction entry screen. We're just going to review the setup options for all users and how that can be overwritten for individual users. In the options, on the Notes and DML hotkey tab, we have the configuration rows that apply to all users who have the tray icon starting. In Information Manager Transactions, individual users, and this is a user-by-user setting, can come to the Notes user options and change either the way their tray icon starts. They could, even if the tray icon was not starting for all users, they could force theirs to start, or they could force theirs not to start. Leaving it as default is we're using the IAM options setting, but you can also override the settings in IAM options. So by selecting this option, I could come now and delete or change any of these rows, and then for this particular logged on user, I would get a different DML configuration. We have now reviewed the system-wide setup in options on the Notes, DML, and Hotkey tab, and we've seen how to override these options using the Transactions Notes user options. Thank you for your time in viewing this Document Management Link training video. If you go to our website, orchid.systems, and select the Document Management link in the product list, you'll find further information on Document Management Link, brochures, product positioning videos, and a product demonstration. Thank you for your time.